Here's another video which shows you how I incorporate Zentangle patterns into my handmade journals and sketchbooks. You may or may not know that I absolutely love vintage paper, so much so that I named my company after it, Vintage Page Designs. Today I'm going to bring you along as I create a mini mandala on a vintage envelope. Firstly, I'm going to show you some examples in my sketchbook. Secondly, I'm going to give you some tips for success working with delicate vintage papers. Then I'm going to have you work alongside me as I create a mini mandala in my journal. Please stay until the end because I have a fun little giveaway for you, and I will leave all the links to the tools and supplies that I'm using today underneath this video. Okay, let's dive in and look at some vintage paper. Here's a mandala done on a 5x5 inch old book page, and here's a little bit of Zentangle done on an old vintage map. Here's an example of one of the envelopes that I will be doing today. I slid a little tag inside as a nice surprise. And now here's a larger version. The journal's 8x8, so these mandalas are fairly big. And then here are a couple small ones done on little white tiles. When you're working with vintage papers and you find a real favourite like this French airmail letter that I found several years ago, I like to scan or photocopy it so I can use it again. My other tip is when these papers are very fragile, you want to glue them onto a substrate or a thicker piece of paper before you do your mandala work on it. I finished this one earlier today and now I'm cutting it out. Using a metal ruler and a sharp blade, I put it onto a piece of watercolour paper that had got a little bit stained and dirty, so instead of throwing it away, I glued my vintage envelope to it and then did my mandala on top. Now let's find a page in my journal to add it to. Put it right here. Now my next tip is to use a dry adhesive. By this I mean a glue stick, or you'll see in a minute that I'm using a double stick tape. The reason being that if we use a wet glue such as a PVA, even matte medium or Mod Podge, it can make that fragile vintage paper very wrinkly, even if you're putting onto a substrate. So I like to keep my glues very dry. Another choice would be a tape runner, the kind that you find in scrapbooking sections of your craft store. If you cannot find vintage papers at your local flea market or consignment store, then I encourage you to look on Etsy or eBay. I found these really lovely old letters and envelopes several years ago, and I currently have a few of my vintage paper packs still in my store. I'll leave a link below, but we don't have many of those left, I'm afraid. So here's the envelope that I chose to work with. I took out the letter that was in there. And I'm going to be using a compass, a metal compass, to create the circles that I need for my mandala. I've just marked a center point on the envelope. I'm not measuring, I'm just drawing some random circles. I try not to overthink this. As long as I have like 3 bands to work in, then I make some smaller and larger circles next to them. This is meant to be an intuitive process. So there are my circles. Now I am dividing it into 4 with my pencil and ruler, so into 4 quarters. To divide it by 8, I could use a protractor, but I'm just going to use my ruler, mark the center point between those 2/4 sections on all of the sides. Then I'm going to join up the lines to make 8 sections. On larger mandalas you would do more sections, but on these mini ones I find 8 sections is about all I can handle. There we go. Now I'm going to grab my pen, start out by making some shallow C shapes at the intersections of my lines, all going in the same direction, twisting my envelope as I work. Now I'm adding an additional C in between the original ones, outlining the edge of my circle, outlining the inner part of my circle. And now I'm going to colour in every other section. I've placed a piece of copier paper there to protect my hand from getting extra ink on it and then smudging that all over my work. Take your time filling in every other square. Now outlining the outer circle. Dividing it up like I did with the pattern in the circle underneath. Now we have some squares to play with. I'm going to bisect them with a diagonal line, add some stripes and then a little half circle. These diagonal lines have a slight curve to them. Notice here that when I'm adding these extra lines, I'm keeping the original line on my left. It's easier to outline that way. Adding an additional circle so I can just outline this inner circle. Now I'm adding some petal shapes from corner to corner for these squares. Then I'm going to add some circles, 3 circles inside each one, which kind of resemble seed pods. Then taking my Micron 01 and filling in the background of those seed pods with black to make them pop. Filling in the center circle, dividing it up into 16. And filling in every other section. Extending the lines on the outer part of the circle. and joining them with some curved lines. You can see how I'm repeating shapes throughout the mandala. This is like half of one of those seed pod shapes. Outlining it again, keeping my original line on the left. I'm going to colour in that half leaf shape. Some drama around the edge. Extending out those outer lines some more. Going with a smaller pen and repeating the little leaf shape again. That's what makes these mandalas pleasing to the eye, is the repetition of shape. I've noticed that those lines which are kind of close together, little parallel lines, aren't repeated anywhere else, so I'm deciding to repeat them inside my original circle. One tiny detail, some tiny little circles on top of my leaf shape. I'm going to add some shading. I'm using a white charcoal pencil. You notice there that I keep the Tortillon or blending stump attached to the white pencil with a rubber band, because you have to use a different colour one. A different Tortillon for each different colour charcoal you use. Adding a little highlight in those black areas. Now I'm going in with my white blending stump and just smoothing out that white chalk. This is giving us a little highlight in the center of that original pattern, which almost looks like a life preserver. Shading around the edges, those white sections. Going in and blending them. This time with a different blending stump, one specifically for regular charcoal. Decided that I need to add a little more detail in the center, another half leaf shape. Adding some shading around the outside of those triangles. And blending them. Find a bit of shading around those half leaf shapes. A little bit in the center. Going in with a fine eraser, just getting rid of any extra pencil lines, though most of them have been covered up now. Adding some double stick tape to the back of this envelope. Then adding it to my journal. And then you can insert something inside the envelope, like a little tag, or a quote. I have scanned some of these old envelopes and uploaded them to my website. The link will be below and you can download them from there completely for free if you would like to make one of these mandalas yourself. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I will see you very soon. Thanks for watching.